Good evening, everyone. Hello. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm Blue Cease. I'm the Executive Director of the Rochester Contemporary Art Center. Welcome to Learning Worlds, the second in our 4-session program on immersive media, supported by New York State Council on the Arts and Wave Farm, and led by series organizer Rebekkah Palov. Our series, is organized in partnership with 10 other arts organizations throughout the state of New York, including our neighbors and friends at Visual Studies Workshop and Alfred University, the Institute for Electronic Art. We had a terrific kickoff event a couple of weeks ago where we engaged with a few artist project demos, and Rebekkah laid out some of the most basic definitions and sort of the evolving language and taxonomy of immersive media. Today, we'll continue to learn about artificial intelligence and how two terrific artists, Stephanie and Trevor, are engaging with immersive media in their work. And before I hand it off to Rebekkah for introductions and to get us started, I just want to mention a couple quick reminders and thank yous. First of all, we are committed to making these talks and all of our virtual programs, as accessible as possible. I want to recognize and thank our interpreter, Sean, for providing his services today. If you need interpreting, please just say yes in the chat. And if we don't receive confirmation chat in the next, say, 10 minutes or so, then Sean will be able to relax and just participate as an attendee. Throughout the program, if you have questions, please pop those into the chat after the main dialogue and series of back and forth questions between Rebekkah and the artists. Rebekkah and I will moderate a few of those questions back to the artists toward the end of the program. Those of you who are new to us, Rochester Contemporary Art Center, or RoCo as we're known, we're in downtown Rochester, New York, which of course is Haudenosaunee land, more specifically the Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We have a nice, long, rich history, 44-year history in our region. I invite any of you who are not familiar with our programs to check out our website, rochestercontemporary.org, which I'm embarrassed to say our host is actually having problems. So our website is currently down, weirdly enough. So you can go and visit our website, hopefully tomorrow, fingers crossed. In addition to today's session, we have another program in this series on the 8th, that's Thursday, focused on virtual reality, and on the 13th, focused on AR and mixed reality. We'll pop those links into the chat, and I hope you all will come back and participate in the full suite of programs. We'll also link to a terrific resource that Rebekkah has developed for this project, an independent site that really spells out the language and taxonomy. I want to recognize the members of our small team here at RoCo who made this event happen so far and have made the whole series possible. Jess and Alyssa are on the call tonight. Katie and Frankie and Carrie for helping to promote and administer this series of talks, and our first in-person event a couple weeks ago. Our current exhibition here at RoCo is a benefit sale for the people of Ukraine in partnership with Rock Maidan. That show runs through the 17th. All of our exhibitions here at RoCo are supported in part by the New York State Council on the Arts, the Farish Foundation, Monroe County, Mary S. Mulligan Charitable Trust, and about 1,000 other members who make a small annual donation to support our organization and our programming. If you're not yet a member of RoCo, I hope you will consider joining and supporting all that we do here at Rochester Contemporary Art Center. Lastly, and you'll probably hear me reiterate this throughout the evening, I really want to thank Rebekkah for her terrific work on this project, both as a researcher and really as a programmer and a curator. She's really providing an incredible service to the field and to art communities throughout New York State with her efforts on this program. It's an honor to work with her. Rebekkah, if we were in person, I would say, please join me in welcoming you, but we won't all clap. Please take the mic.
That's okay. Thank you. That's very kind of you. All right. Welcome. Thanks to RoCo and the New York State Council of the Arts. Tonight's conversation is part of a NYSCA-funded Immersive Media Technology Initiative. And the initiative is to stir up the creation, appreciation, and understanding of immersive media for New York artists, art organizations, and arts communities. Our art technology topic this evening is AI, artificial intelligence. AI is not a single technology, but a family of computer problem-solving technologies. They are background technology in immersive media where they process complex information about the real world, like positioning, what the camera, big quotation, sees, and what the mic picks up. AI can compute on its feet and can respond out in the world. To do so, it processes massive amounts of data about the world. For what, how, and why this data is used is important to understand and for artists to engage, especially as computer technologies become more tightly woven into human experience and AI technologies take on a ubiquitous character. AI is a technology built by humans. And this is where Trevor Paglin and Stephanie Dinkins engage creatively in projects and practice. And that's what we'll be discussing in conversation this evening. So let me introduce the artist for everyone. Stephanie Dinkins. Hi. Stephanie Dinkins is a transmedia artist who creates platforms for dialogue about race, gender, aging, and future histories. Dinkins's art practice employs emerging technologies, documentary practices, and social collaboration towards equity and community sovereignty. She is driven to help co-create more equitable, social, and technological ecosystems. Dinkins is a professor at Stony Brook University, where she founded the Future History Studio and holds the Kusama Endowed Professorship in Art. Dinkins earned an MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. She's an alumna of the Whitney Independent Studies program. She exhibits internationally at a broad spectrum of community, private, and institutional venues. Dinkins is a 2021 United States Artist Fellow and Knight Arts and Tech Fellow. Her art practice has been generously supported by the Brueggen Institute, Onassis Foundation, Stanford Institute for the Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, Creative Capital, Saronis Equity Fellowship, Data and Society Research Institute, Sundance New Frontier Story Lab, iBeam, Pioneer Works, Tech Lab, New Inc., Nokia Bell Labs, Blue Mountain Center, the Laundromat Project, Santa Fe Art Institute, and Art Omni. Wow. Wired, Art in America, Artsy, Art 21, Hyperallergenic, the BBC, Wilson Quarterly, and a host of popular podcasts have highlighted Dinkins' art and ideas. And we're so excited that she's here to speak with us this evening. Our second artist in conversation, Trevor Paglin, is an artist whose work spans image making, sculpture, investigative journalism, writing, engineering, and numerous other disciplines. Paglin's work has had one-person exhibitions at the Smithsonian Museum of Art, Washington, D.C., Carnegie Museum of Art, Pittsburgh, Fondazione Prada, Milan, Barbican Center, London, Vienna Secession, Vienna, and Proto Cinema, Istanbul, and participated in group exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Art, the Tate Modern, and numerous other venues. Paglin has launched an artwork into distant orbit around the Earth in collaboration with Creative Time and MIT, contributed research and cinematography to the Academy Award-winning film Citizen4, and created a radioactive public sculpture for the exclusion zone in Fukushima, Japan. Paglin is the author of several books and numerous articles on subjects, including experimental geography, artificial intelligence, state secrecy, military symbology, photography, and visuality. Paglin's work has been profiled in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, Wired, the Financial Times, Artforum, and Aperture. In 2014, he received the Electronic Frontiers Foundation Pioneer Award, and in 2016, he won the Deutsche Börse Photography Prize. Paglin was named a MacArthur Fellow in 2017. Paglin holds a BA from UC Berkeley and an MFA from the Art Institute of Chicago and a PhD in geography from UC Berkeley. Welcome. Wow. I've written a number of questions in 4 areas, and I'm going to ask the question, and then Stephanie respond and Trevor respond. And we also have an opportunity for the conversation to go whichever way. I mean, we have very accomplished artists, obviously. So we'll start with beginnings. How was working in this media first seeded? What was that exposure? How did you take it from intrigue to making artworks? What is that story? We'll start with Stephanie.
Wow, well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to talk to both you, Rebekkah, and Trevor. This is a really easy question for me in a lot of ways, because my work, especially with artificial intelligence, was triggered by a very specific object, and it is a robot called Bina 48. She is head and shoulders on a pedestal, Black woman. I had never seen such a thing. I don't think I thought I'd ever see such a thing. And I ran into this on YouTube. And you can imagine I was just baffled and started asking lots of questions in my head about, well, where's this thing coming from? Who's funding it? Why is she a Black woman? What is it? What is its aims? Like, why does this thing exist? And so for me, you know, a sense of curiosity and cruising around really started everything. And then a kind of leap of faith in terms of chatting up the Teresa Movement Foundation, who are the curators of Bina 48, and asking if I could converse with the robot, became the real catalyst for my practice in this area. And I was super lucky in that, you know, they said, yes, come on up. They like people to talk to Bina 48 because it expands her database and gives her more content to work from. So I was allowed to go up there, and I decided from the get-go that A, I wanted to see if I could make that robot my friend. Like, can we just become friends? And B, I wanted to ask it, who are her people, right? Like, who did she find herself related to, or what did she find herself related to? And I would say now I think of that as a question of what does the robot find itself related to in terms of the spectrum of humanist, technology, and nature. And so for me, that really was the catalyst, and talking to the robot, yet again, kind of pushed me towards different questions. And I'll say that my practice has become this kind of crazy series of questions about what the technologies are, what they hold for the future, and how we as like average folks, because I kind of consider myself this sort of average folk who fell into this arena and now is playing in it and sees holes. For instance, with Bina 48, the holes were around asking her about her experiences as a black woman, right? And having that feel very placid, very politically correct. And to me, the idea that something that was so representative was politically correct was dangerous. And I could see that that might be very detrimental to the communities that I come from and care about, and wanted to start to think about, well, what could I do to structure that differently? Or how do we start to shift it? Like, we can't base our technologies that are so far reaching on this very surface information. And so for me, that was really the start. And I've just been following the questions ever since.
That's terrific. Wow.
Yeah,
Trevor, what's your story?
I am afraid I don't have a single moment of, that was a pivot point. I think I have a lot of interests, and one of the core things that I'm interested in is a vision. Like, how do we photons come into our eyes or go into a sensor or something like that, and different forms of meaning are created in part through that, in part through history, in part through culture. And I think unpacking that has been one of the interests that's guided my career or my life work or what have you. On the other hand, I have a long history of looking at military technologies and looking at warfare and looking at how those forms of very coercive institutions can influence society and structure everyday life. Related to that, I have a long history of looking at things like surveillance and data collection. And so I guess I have this background of things that very much come together in a field like AI, or more specifically, the kind of computer vision applications of AI, or that branch of it. And I think to tell that story a different way, in the 1990s, I was doing a lot of work looking at prisons and the geography of prisons, and was working as a part of a prison abolitionist group. And I really wanted to understand how these sorts of infrastructures that we might think of as being far away are actually very present in our everyday lives. And that September 11th happens, and the signature institution of that is a prison, right? Guantanamo Bay. And so I've seen all kinds of connections between the creation of the so-called prison industrial complex in the US and a lot of homologies between that and this emerging war on terror. And secrecy, of course, was a part of that. And doing that work led me to work with Laura Poitras on a lot of the Edward Snowden revelations and looking at NSA mass surveillance. And when you look at that for a while, you realize, hey, there's this much bigger NSA out there. It's called Google, it's called Facebook. They're doing the same kinds of things that an NSA is doing, towards slightly different ends in some cases, but in other cases, very, very similar ends. And just, I guess, my desire has been to try to pick apart those infrastructures, try to understand them, try to understand what sorts of politics are in them, what sorts of sense making are in them. And so I guess that's the same story told in two different ways, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Stephanie, you had like an event come in, and then Trevor, you're already kind of working with mapping, I guess. Mapping is great. Mapping. That's very interesting. So let's continue on with the beginnings. Maybe you answered this, but maybe there's more. Is there something in your practice that artificial intelligence was an extension of? I think Trevor, it's kind of addressed that a bit. How does this earlier medium inform how you approach artificial intelligence now? Has there been a dialogue back and forth across medium, or just did it all flip once you first engaged in this? Stephanie, we'll just go back and forth.
Sure. For me, and I think maybe Trevor and I share a little bit of this, really it's photography. Like, I come out of a photography background, and I've come to think about artificial intelligence or some of the product of that as photography, right? And so the idea of investigating something and looking at it, looking how it kind of notes a moment, right? Or kind of build up a space is really interesting to me. And the idea of documenting, right? Because even the practice with Bina 48, it's me documenting me talking to a thing, right? And then, next projects kind of document people's thoughts and ask them to donate them to a project, or oral history. So I'm always kind of working with ideas of images, ideas of histories taken from the perspective of, you know, the general public, and then trying to mold them into something that does do this work of looking at the systems around us and how we kind of live within them, work around them, break them down, what they're doing to us and what we're doing to them. So the circuitous route of examining the systems that we live in and trying to pull them apart or make them at least legible for folks so that we can all start to look at them and figure out how we survive really the systems that we live under or live within or around.
Trevor?
I don't really think I have anything more articulate or cogent to say than the way that Stephanie just put it. I think we have a shared interest in looking at infrastructures on one hand and picking them apart, trying to understand what forms of sense making are built into them, what forms of politics are built into them, and then on the other hand, visuality and perception, and how do we go from things like sense perception or images towards forms of meaning making, and then how do those forms of meaning making in turn have a politics to them and shape everyday lives. And you said something in the first part of your presentation about when you look at AI and you look at a lot of these technologies, how surface it is. And that's, I could not agree more. And I feel like in some ways that's been my whole project of looking at AI, is just pointing out how preposterously, ridiculously superficial this is, not only theoretically, but also on the technology side.
Yeah, agreed. You know, it's so interesting because it's sold to us as something that is much deeper, much more cogent than it actually is. And so, yeah, I am with you so all the way on that.
Yeah, that was my thinking, is that I don't know how to say this. That it's just so mythologized and it's just problem solving and the thing, but I also get excited about it and all its sort of, I don't know, routes, I guess, right? And that, like, wait a minute, this is technology that is in the world and it's problem solving, and that I don't know, I'm very I don't know, the interest in that and the intrigue, the control, and also the opportunity though too. Well, we'll get to more questions. I'm kind of rambling here, but now this is kind of a practical thing. If you have thoughts, recommendations on how an artist community might start out, are there communities and or resources that you could kind of throw out?
Trevor, do you have anything?
There's so many ways to approach this, and I think the least interesting way to approach it is to start playing with DALL-E and image generators and things like that. You know, probably the least interesting way for me to approach it is to try to take existing technologies and do something with it. I would start thinking about it in different ways. I guess for me, when I started working in it, I wanted to first understand what is the theory of vision that is built into computer vision systems, right? So part of that is just understanding technically how is an AI system, which is ultimately a statistical engine, translating this bubbling and buzzing and, you know, liquid and flowsy world out there into something that is quantitative. And then once it's been translated to something quantitative, how do you do things that appear to us from the outside to resemble things like vision or perception or language? How do you get there from a statistical perspective? So that is a theoretical question, but it's also a historical question. You can go back and look at the history of experiments on animals and on computers that gave rise to the theory of cognition that is at the center of the AI paradigm on one hand. So that's one route you could go. Another route you can go, and I have to give a shout out to my friend Kate Crawford here, is to look at the infrastructure itself. My friend Kate wrote a book called The Atlas of AI. She goes and she says, okay, well, sure, AI is statistics and it's computers and things like that, but it's also power generation. It consumes enormous amount of power. Where does that power come from? It's also made out of batteries. Where do those batteries come from? It's also made out of cultural assumptions. Where do those cultural assumptions? And so to start picking apart the phenomena or the infrastructure of AI in those ways, that's the kind of work that has been most convincing to me, or most the work that I'm personally most interested. I've been less interested in the work where people are trying to generate things using the tools and things like that, although I've done that myself, and we can talk about that later if that's of interest.
Okay, Stephanie?
Yeah, and I would almost go in the opposite direction, right? So I'm always trying to draw people in who feel like they don't have a place in the technology, to just get their hands wet a little bit and start to feel like they could possibly understand what's there. And so I'm like, yeah, go check out some Google collabs, go run them, then go change things up and see what happens. And the hope is, and actually I would say to do that not only for what's there, but then do something with it that is relevant to you and who you are, so that you actually get kind of pulled in a little deeper. I think about it as tinkering and crafting in the space, right? So using the tools, and I've actually run some like okay GANs too. And in a way I think, okay, do that once or twice and then keep going, but then start to really unravel, or at least like just pull apart and break things. And through breaking things, you start to understand a little bit the ins and outs and how things are kind of operating. And then you can decide what kind of deeper theoretical research you want to do, because it's such a broad berth of things that we could be looking at. But you know, most of the time when people talk to me about it, they're like, oh, I could never. I'm like, sure you could. It's not that crazy. It takes some time and effort for sure. And there's some toys out there that you can play with just to feel it out. And then let's get more involved.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, my mom was a computer programmer, so I just sort of grew up as like, oh, that was a way she could make worlds. Like getting your hands in the technology is kind of this free, awesome space. And I don't know that myth that I can't. I think is I don't know. Why do we buy that for a second? Okay.
Well, well, let's talk about systems for a second, right? Because depending on who you are, like people are constantly telling you what you can't do or what is not available to you, right? Like to be lucky enough to have the model is great. But when you don't have the model and you don't even have instructors or teachers who believe that you are capable of the thing, then it becomes like, well, how do I claw my way in if I'm so inclined?
Yeah, but absolutely. But I think that part of sort of our opportunity here is to communicate, at least from my sort of angle of whatever, it's just like, it's a space where once you get in it, you can, that other stuff can kind of drop out because you're just doing your research. You're just like, I don't know, a full kind of like, obviously there's bias in the AI technology per se, obviously. But I also just feel being in technology, I get free of some biases that kind of, I don't know, I feel kind of free of them. I get to sort of just be me when I'm working on computers in whichever way. And I find that kind of, I don't know, I kind of want to share that. Okay, well, we're moving on to our next section. Creative tool. Right. What is your relationship with AI as a creative tool? How would you characterize those discoveries? What tickles you? What might be frustrating, fascinating about its grip on you? Oh, I'll put them all together. I'll put the second one together in the section. And then leading on, Can you characterize how you shape or mold a piece using AI technology? For example, the output. Do you use AI to shape the output? Do you use AI to shape a critique? Do you use AI to shape a concept? And then how is it employed, AI employed towards those ends? Anyone can jump in. That was a lot.
Oh, that was definitely a lot.
I can break it down. More is more, right? All right.
It's an interesting question though, right? Yeah, AI is a creative tool. It's such an interesting question. I'm like, it's a place to kind of start to feel out what's around. I don't know. And I feel like I collaborate a lot with kind of these algorithms that do certain things and then figure out what they're doing. And then I'm often amazed at what comes out and then have to kind of unravel and try to figure out, well, why did that happen? Where's that coming from? And what do I do with it? Right. And the other question for me is often, how much do I try to control what comes out versus just letting it do what it's doing? And knowing that, okay, I have a particular algorithm or system that I'm working with, it behaves in this way, I fed it this data, and it starts giving me things that I'm like, whoa, like, what are you saying? What are you doing? And that's in terms of chatbots. Where are you coming to these conclusions? How are you doing this kind of discernment? Which is always a fascinating process for me. As the maker, it becomes like this kind of rolling, getting to know something that I really enjoy. Luckily, because the in the computer itself stuff is like, oh, mind numbing. But then the results and the process and the I'm going to say the relationship that is being built, right? And is always a fascinating place to be within it for me.
Terrific. Yeah, dialoguing with, I don't know, unknown outcomes are just sort of the curiosity of it. And also that you're dialoguing with it as a result of your inputs. So great. Trevor?
I'm struggling to figure out how to answer this question, I think, because my initial thought is to think about AI as a prompt, to think about other things, you know, to think about visuality, to think about infrastructure, to think about space and how to think about when you have a camera that can watch you sleeping and somebody thinks they can try to extract information from that. And I think, well, how does that change the landscape of everyday life? And how does that prompt us to see the world differently? And so I think initially, if there's a creative prompt, it's the looking at how the technologies work and then also trying to think through what the implications of them are, you know, in the broader social context. Now, so I struggle to, in terms of a creative tool, I don't think about it as
has like really good ratings.
Oh, I heard someone.
Did you do Mapu Tofu?
Someone, could you mute yourself? Hi. Thanks.
So I've done a lot of work doing things like building my own training data that would try to contradict the logic of other types of training data. Like I've built training sets that are based on Freud's interpretations of dreams and allegorical texts from, you know, the 17th century. And it's just been a way to explore visuality for me. In terms of those kinds of direct building tools and then get a prompt and then be inspired by that, I generally get bored with that pretty quickly, to be honest with you, because I sort of try to understand how the system is doing something, and then I feel like once I understand it, it's like, okay, that's that. I think, having said that, there is an aesthetics to working with computer vision or AI, and you can guide the direction that aesthetics might take, and I always try to guide it in the direction of it falling apart or it not working. That's the glitches in it tend to be much more interesting to me. The face that it sees on the side of a rock, or you show a navigation system to a cloud and it freaks out and starts making kaleidoscopes, and like those are the moments where I guess the aesthetic language of it, of the tools, is most interesting to me.
Stephanie, do you have some more? I saw you were.
No. I was just giggling because I love the glitch of it, right? It's, my projects, even in public, like they often are kind of developed and continue developing in public, and they're really glitchy and kind of wonky. And sometimes they do what is prescribed, and a lot of times they don't. And it's interesting to have curators get mad at you because it's not performing in the way that they expect it to, right? But then I'm like, this is kind of developing in a way that's quite interesting. And I think way better than something that would just answer your question. Like, who cares if something answers your question? However, if there's something bubbling and glitching and doing the weirdness of kind of analyzing in strange ways, that to me, and what it kind of gives back to us, or what we might recognize through it, is much more interesting for sure.
Yeah, I feel like I'm learning too. Looking at a lot of artists, that comes up repeatedly, like, oh, once it starts to break or do the unexpected, then I'm really engaged and triggered into it. And like also trying to get it to break as well. It's very interesting. And I'm from time-based video film, so Namjoon Pike, let's just break some stuff and go in and dig in the circuits and see what we can do. So it's interesting that these sort of impulses, creative impulses with technology, have a sort of a long, I don't know, road. It's really, yeah, great. Okay.
I think it comes back to what you were saying before, Stephanie, about like when you find those glitches and you find those breaks, you find how shallow or how deep it is, right? You can...
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And, on the other side of that, like I find myself thinking of a thing that I listen to a lot. If you have an iPhone and you say something to Siri, and it'll often go, right? And I'm really intrigued by this crazy response that this thing does, because it's trying to trick us into a belief of some sort of its abilities, right? And then that becomes, well, how is it training us? Like, what are they trying to train us into, right? And then how do we break that crap so that it's just totally evident for folks that it is what it is?
Yeah, I think like that earlier discussion we were somewhat having about, like, I don't know, the mythologizing of it. It's ridiculous, but okay. Well, let's keep rolling because we're rolling. This one will be juicy. AI narratives, creation of AI narratives. Ooh. Your thoughts on narratives? May they be mythologizing or advocacy for imagined positive potential of these technologies. By example, AI thinking arriving, this is silly, but it's a potential, thinking at somewhat parity with human sentience. A metaverse/cyberspace delivering enhanced, extended, resplendent corporal modes of experience. Freeing us from location, toil, longing, I don't know, or as a way to advance health in society and environment. Or the converse, leading society to lost agency and subject to coercion. It's kind of a lot. I can start if that's okay. Like, I want all of them. Seriously, I want all of that junk. I really do. Like, yeah, I want extended corporal whatever. And like, yeah, I think that healing the earth and each other, like, yeah, I want that too. And I also want to dig my heels in and push back against coercion. I just kind of want it all, I think. But then again, it's a statistical program. So, right, that's my shtick on it. You guys? Oh,
And the biggest myth is the word intelligence here, right? I mean, that's the starter. I always thought it would be funny if you wrote a little Chrome extension that just replaced the word AI with like linear algebra every time it saw it, to see how you would read text differently, or non-linear algebra, whatever you want, algebra. And then we'd be having a very different conversation and potentially yeah, much more interesting one. So that there's that founding myth, I guess, which is in the word itself. But there is something to what you're talking about, almost the aesthetics of the supernatural associated with it, which is that, that is true that you can build a 15 terabyte data set and you can spend $2 million training some model in it and burn, half a forest to do that. And that will find patterns in that data that you couldn't find with a pen and a piece of paper, right? It will find, if it can play more chess games than all the humans that have ever played chess in the history of the world, it will find ways to beat humans at chess. And because we can't do that, we look at that and say, oh, we can't do that. That must be supernatural, right? And then you start to imbue it with some kind of power that is, extraterrestrials. I mean, it goes into that bucket where UFOs live and where God lives and all this kind of thing, right? And so I think there's much more to the mythology of it, but I think of those being two kind of places where it starts.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in this question. It depends on what the situation is. If I need my medical thing cured, and it's quite rare, I'm all for it, right? I want the machine to go through and figure out exactly what is wrong or what might be the right treatment for me. If I'm thinking about surveillance in neighborhoods of color, right, and what that means, I'm like, oh, no way. Although my no way comes with the caveat that, oh, well, even if we banish the cameras from our neighborhoods, like, we're being surveilled anyway, not perhaps from street level, but maybe from space level, right? So it's really a push-pull from me. And, the one thing I hope for a lot is that the narratives are not always those narratives of fear, and that we don't talk ourselves out of like really exploring what the technology can do, right? Like I'm taken with situations when we allow kind of AIs to go at it or chat, and maybe they develop their own language and we no longer understand them, which then becomes a really scary, right? And it's like our impetus is just shut it down, which makes a lot of sense in one way. But then how do we discover what is actually going on if we just shut it down? So I'm all about, well, let's be curious and try to figure out how to be cautiously curious, and let's be optimistic about it and do what we can with like if the technology is all around us, why wouldn't we use it to do big things and like smaller community-based things, right? Like build archives that are the purview of a particular community. Like there's so many different ways that we can mythologize it, but most of all, I'm like, well, let's mythologize it as something that is actually available, if we're not going to shut it down, and that not only the big companies have access to being able to do stuff, and that there are ways around these things, and there are different ways to do things as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point. The way I'm interpreting what you're saying is, say, let's recognize that you can't distinguish the technologies from the politics that are built into it, right? And so thinking about them in a way one and the same, which is not the way that we've been, that's not the myth of technology. The myth of technology is one of progress, right? It's not one of politics, right?
Yeah. No, I always come back, like it's interesting that I always wind up coming back to the essential like question of what's the value and who's assigning it? How is it being assigned? Because no matter what we're creating or using it for, that's what it gets down to in the end. And that always comes back to us as humans, as programmers, as users, as many different things and ways of being.
Yeah, I think I was in my own research, I got hit in the face by my own kind of bias towards the like master controller around these things. Like, and it's like, no, wait a minute, what? It's there's a lot of complexity in there, and like you say, like it's a technology that's going to transform us in our thinking. Probably. I was just imagining it kind of like what language and the printing press and that way, you know, the medievalist became the media theorist, and this like, oh, well, this might be this other kind of technology we can engage with. Obviously not the level of language, but if we think it in terms of language, what we can do with language, right? How we can sort of, I don't know, put each other down, learn empathy, I don't know. Share, discover, get challenged. It seems really, I want to be positive, and I also I want the complexity, I guess, in the narratives. Great.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, let's keep rolling. All right. Does your work play pranks, undercut, seek to expose, or engage or promote these narratives? Is the medium the message? Will it create a social, creative environment by its mere presence, AI, any of these technologies? Is then literacy a good approach to AI narratives? Oh, I'll wrap it up in the big question. Do you think AI by its presence will bring us back to the world or further from it?
No small questions here.
I was really, I like, I don't know. I'm really intrigued by that question, because Stephanie said like your engagement with this are these kind of questions. This sort of technology is just, I think, a way of probing, I guess. So, you know.
I think it's definitely a way of probing. And, you know, will it by its presence bring us back to the world or further from it? Again, I think that's up to us in so many ways, right? Like I feel there are these technologies that we can use in various ways. You know, if we go with the capitalist forces and just kind of try to speed things up, do things faster, make homogenize things so it's just easier for everything to be kind of parsed and done quickly without kind of considerations of it, human or living entity or even non-living entity concerns, then maybe further away, because we're just pushing things that we seem to need, but maybe not. However, like you know, I always want to, you know, well, here we go with the breaking it again. Like break it down to the point that, you know, we have to slow down so much while looking at the technology and seeing what it's doing and how it's doing and how we collaborate or work with and around these things. Like break it, break it, break it, break it down so that we can then build something that might, right? And that's a big might, be able to bring us back to ourselves as opposed to further away or more kind of, you know, the myths of kind of we're going to be out of jobs, out of everything, right? And I think if we just push in the ways that we're going, okay, maybe, you know, I was in a fight with a lawyer friend the other day, or in a nice conversation, and you know, he was like, well, experts are necessary. And I'm like, well, you know, there's a way in which I'm like, well, what happens when the AI is the expert and I don't exactly need you anymore? Which is not a question, which is maybe a horrible question to ask a lawyer. But like how we start to do these things becomes really important in my view. Like what we do with data, how we create those data sets and how we use them to kind of, you know, expand. And like, you know, my idea is trying to figure out what care looks like within these systems. And I have no idea what that actually means at this moment, or how that goes, or what the data set that gets us there looks like. But like, how do we build the care instead of towards capital, towards punitive, like our nature is to go towards the punitive, towards equity? Like those are the questions, and they're kind of broad, crazy questions, but I think they're necessary.
Yeah, I just love the slowing it down as well in this, and then the energy crisis as well. And this, like, again, I'm repeating myself, but yeah, just seeing my own tendency towards this master controller thing is really when I learn more about artists such as yourself. I think I have some other artists where I was just like blown away, like, oh yeah, it really can do these work positively for environment. Why aren't we expecting that, out of it instead of this sort of energy consumption? It's terrific. Trevor?
Yeah, I think I guess the way that I try to think about it is a little bit. I don't think of tools as ever being neutral, and I don't think that any tool can ever be appropriated by anybody for any purpose. And I guess for me, it's an interesting question to ask, what different roads could these technologies go down? And to a large extent, we don't know, and we might never know, particularly as the models and infrastructures get more and more complicated. When you see AI being developed at scale, there's really less than a dozen companies that are able to do that, because at this point, you really do need to have data capture at the scale of the planet to build a large language model, for example. Having said that, we can absolutely imagine more regional or localized. We can have different size models that are looking at different things more specifically. But I am always suspicious of imagining that we, for example, can have a society that has a more sustainable relationship to nature and has automobiles, right? At some point, these might be incompatible. And so thinking through that is, I think, a place where a lot of work needs to be done. And I think of Stephanie's work as very much trying to do that work of reimagining the possibilities of these sorts of not only tools, but the kinds of politics that are built into the tools and the forms of meaning making that are built into the tools on one hand, and then also trying to clearly articulate what the limits of those approaches are, and trying not only to define, here's the circle of things that we want to use AI for, but here is all the stuff that we don't want to use it for. And I think that's a really urgent question at the moment.
Stephanie, did you have a response?
Well, no, I had a question for Trevor. In like, do you think we will be able to limit, right, the technology, the AI, to the things that we don't think it will be used for, or it should be used for?
I don't know what "we" means in that case. Will the House of Representatives? No.
No, definitely. Yeah, no. So true. A kind of big societal we, even beyond America, right? But just like, I always wrestle with this idea of, oh, well, the cat is out of the bag. Are we ever going to be able to get it back? And are we going to be able to wrangle it? Or do we have the, urge or impetus to really do that? And how would we do it? So I was just curious about your ideas.
No, I think there's plenty of smaller examples. I mean, we can think about, I think, fossil fuel regulation. Then maybe there's an analogy there. Even this is not nearly as aggressive as it needs to be, but something as simple as California saying, okay, we're going to phase out, cars that use gasoline over the next decade or something like that. There's cities banning facial recognition. Cities like, I think Oakland has banned it, you know, a few cities in California. European regulations around privacy. Again, these are all inadequate, but they show the possibility of regulation, really, you know. And so I think I agree with you on a practical level, like what are the mechanisms through which that regulation could occur, and could you create a political structure whereby it's not just, you know, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk's, you know, political interests that are being represented, but certainly there's a long history of humans rejecting technologies or rejecting the social and political packages that come with different kinds of technologies, whether those technologies are money or whether those technologies are, you know, mass surveillance or what have you.
Thank you.
And I think that's what's so sinister about the mythology, right? The supernatural of it is that, yeah, how are people going to have, like, I don't know, literacy in such a way that they can address these forces? And again, like artists working in it and making those critiques within it, I think are really great for opening that up for us. Okay. More firmly into the potential. Ooh. Part of the NISCA initiative is to position New York State artists and arts culture more firmly in the creative, cultural enhancing potential of AI forms, especially in communities that historically have had blocked or had limited access to such transformative technologies. What are your ideas, recommendations, responses on how to change how access has been into how it will be? What are those steps? What does this change look like structurally? How does that imagination take root? And then what does it need to grow? It's a really good initiative.
Yeah, it's a really interesting premise. I don't know that I believe it, right? Like
Wow,
I'm
great.
trying to get like, wait a minute, like I hear what's being said. But historically we know that like this kind of initiative like doesn't quite function. And so I'm always interested. And then once we start pointing towards specific communities that have had problems in the past or been, it's like we've already written off or kind of lopped off a lot of people and they're concerned. So it says to me that, oh, this is we're not going to come together to have something that works here, because we're already segmented things off in a way that says that, well, this is for you. I don't quite have to be concerned, or I'm concerned in a way that is benevolent, but not deeply, right? And I'm trying to think of like, what's the deeper approach that kind of, you know, pulling things into these communities. And this is just you're getting kind of a vestige of a thought that's coming up a lot for me lately in the past year and a half, with all the initiatives of DEI, right, diversity, equity, and inclusion, where people are doing it on like they say they're doing it. It's on such a surface level that's like, why are we even going through these motions? Like, if we're gonna do something, we need to do it in the way that feels like, or that has depth and is addressing not those people, but the whole, like the whole in some way, or thinking about how we're related in this thing, and then kind of working from there. So I don't know. Like it's the kind of thing that starts to make me shake these days, only because we've seen this so many times. We've seen the initiatives. So now the question is, like, where's the real work? And how do we get to the real of it? And how do we each recognize our, like, how we're implicated in it and our roles within it? Like, really, not just like being helpful, but recognizing where we stand within those systems. So this comes down to like pulling apart those systems and starting to break them down and what's really going on versus like Band-Aid. And I can't even come to any like congealed idea of this right now, right? I'm trying to think about how we get to the space where it doesn't feel like doing for some or welcoming some into a tent that like isn't really recognizing itself and its role within the way things are run. So it's such a hard question.
Your response is terrific on that. Because yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
absolutely, because I think there's the intention, but then how's this thing sort of manifest when it's sort of, I don't know, again, what does it take? Trevor.
One of the things that troubles me a little bit about the way that the question is framed is that correct me if I'm misinterpreting it, but to me it implies that we have marginalized communities and we want to give them access to technology, but what we mean by that access is we want to empower people to have a little tiny bit of like fake control over them, right? But we can rephrase the question differently when we look at, historically marginalized communities. They have tons of access to this technology as the subjects of it, right? Of being the subject of surveillance, of being, having the face recognition camera in the house, of having the workplace monitoring software monitoring their work. And I'm just trying to think along with Stephanie about how recognizing that might, I think you're right that we need a different paradigm of what we mean by access and what we mean by using technology versus being subject to it, right? And are there ways to encourage people to look at those dynamics and play with them and frankly try to break things as you suggested, Stephanie?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, Trevor, right? Like that reciprocal nature of the information, right? Because you're right, there are communities that have lots of knowledge from the other side. And like, what does that, how do we transpose those, or how do we make the circle out of them so that there's a whole as opposed to these pieces that are going on? And yeah, the question is a good question, and to come up with the question that gets at that really would be a great thing to do, right? It's part of that, not only recognizing the knowledge that's there, but honoring it. And like I always think about, considering it equal in certain ways in terms of when we get together and try to think about this. It reminds me of like sitting down at dinners and things with people with different knowledge bases, right? So doctors, technologists, engineers, and then having like the doctors speak doctorese, the engineers speak engineerese, the artists in between trying to kind of, do some kind of translation in between. But for me, it becomes, well, what's the common language so that we can actually all come down, sit together, have real conversation, and then really get to making questions that feel round, as opposed to from one corner or another.
Are you watching
yeah.
Zoom?
Yeah.
Are you in live Zoom?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're here. Yeah, I guess it's just sort of, I'm thinking back to an initial thing that Stephanie had said is like, yeah, that sort of, for me, because it seemed like something I could, I guess, with my mom being a technologist, a computer programmer. So I guess that's sort of my prompt though too, is how does that imagination seed, I guess? That one could or can, I mean, I think criticism came up earlier too about, I don't pay attention to these things, the throw images on the browser and get some cool AI image back. I forget what those are called, but possibly those in their own way might be an entry. And then again, I don't really know. Any other final thoughts on that? And then also the creative communities. I also wonder about leadership with these technologies and the groups of communities. I'll form my question. I have my question written. I'll read it to you. What will it take to develop creative communities, local community support? Is it industry support? Like, what do you think is available now, and where's the work and what's missing?
It's
All right,
a
I'm
really
gonna-
hard one. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Trevor. Go.
It's again, I would love to imagine something that facilitates the blossoming of knowledge that people already have, and the encouragement of engaging with these sorts of technologies on the terms at which those technologies are touching their everyday lives. And so I guess if I was in charge, I would try to imagine like something like almost like something in the style of hacker workshops. So, okay, who can figure out how to beat this facial recognition software? Who can figure out how to hack this job interviewing software? Who can figure out how to make your browser think that you're at work when you're not? And kind of again, I'm trying mentally to get away from a model which assumes that like here are these tools and the goal is to learn how to use these tools to have some power over something in the world, whether that is power over making an artwork or power over something else, and trying to think in a much more horizontal way about the ways in which AI technologies touch our lives, modulate our lives, and what are the places in which we can intervene in that? What are ways in which we can collectively come up with new ways to intervene in that? And are there ways in which we can collectively imagine different worlds, perhaps sometimes through the use of these technologies, but also imagine different worlds in which certain applications of these technologies don't exist?
Yeah, I love the kind of hackathon idea, right? That giving it to people. Like I'm thinking a lot about thinking the technologies beyond being a consumer of them, right? Beyond being kind of placid acceptance. And then like, well, how do you get in there and just start playing with it and doing the thing that it's not supposed to do, having some fun in it, right? I think that's an amazing way, in a way that you could, and I hate the word, I'm going to say the way that we could kind of gamify, right? And I don't like that word or that thought in a lot of ways, like breaking those tools and not just being resigned to what they bring. Because we're often just so resigned, or we think the systems are so much bigger than anything we could possibly do to intercede or impact them, that's like, oh, whatever. Which is one of the reasons I'm always like, well, I'm just like an average person. I have no training in anything I've touched. And yet here I am in some weird way. And, if I can use imagination and time and dedication to play in something and just figure out how it's functioning around me, I think that's open to lots of folks. And I try not to think about it though as a burden for certain communities to kind of fight that thing, right? But as a thing that because we're all living in it and swimming in it, that we could possibly challenge if we so desire.
Terrific. That's really great. Yeah, but just quickly, the data sets, like we're all sort of generating a lot of this anyway, right? We're already kind of makers of so many of these technologies as it is, sort of, maybe, whether we know it or not. Well, but some of us may be generating data set. You know, every time I go on Google, it's taking my stuff. Every time I use Grammarly, like, yeah, I'm helping it along. So
But then, no, I just have to interject.
Please do.
This framing really bothers me, because
Okay.
it implies a structure of consent, and it implies a structure of equality, and this is not what's going on. Like, you have to use
Great.
Google for work. You have to use a cell phone for work.
Great.
These are not consensual structures that you're submitting to.
No, thanks.
Yeah.
That's good.
You cannot use our tool unless you sign up for our platform, right? It's amazing the things that we are just sucked into, as Trevor said, without our consent. And that, yes, information is going towards them, but I agree with that completely.
And we can't opt out in real life. You can't opt out of Google. You can't opt out
Yeah.
of cell phones. So
Great.
Not at this point, right? Yeah. Ooh.
I know. Okay, well, we're at 7:42. You guys ready for more questions? This has been so great. I've thoroughly, I can't thank you enough. This has just been so great. Whoa, let's see what we got going on here. I haven't looked at these yet. To everyone. Oh, Barbara Latanzi. Hi, Barbara. I know Barbara Latanzi has a question. Stephanie, a question for Stephanie. The idea of AI actually training us is an amazing insight and not science fiction. It is happening right now. How do you connect that to your concern for, as you said, the danger for communities that I care about?
Yeah, it definitely is happening right now. I always go, if you've ever watched a little kid interact with Alexa or Google Home, you see how they are being trained by the technology immediately. And then, the way I connect that to my concern is by trying to make alternative models, right? Like I feel like I'm always trying to make these like odd alternative models that serve the communities I care about better. So for example, with the chatbot I've made, when I first started making this and trying to find a data set just to base it out on was so difficult, because like the language models, I'm like, well, the language that they're using is maybe innocuous. Like if it's a movie data set, oh, shouldn't be too bad. But when I think of Blackness in relation to American movies and what that language is, I'm like, I don't want my family anywhere near that, right? What do I do? What do I have to build to set up a set of a data set that I feel is worthy of the communities I care about data, and to support it and care for it, versus just building on top of like all those kind of weird histories and roles. So I'm always thinking about that question and how to navigate it, because I think we're navigating it all the time. And then it's like, well, okay, if we're navigating it, how do I counteract, build into, augment so that it does somewhat better a little bit?
Although the question wasn't directed, Trevor, did you have a comment on that? Nope. Okay. Oh, here's one for both of you from Joshua Baker. Have either of you thought about how AI relates to things like extended mind theory? I'm not well versed in the theory, but extended mind theory, as I understand it, being how technology is used in an extension or expansion of our own minds, both the ability to retain information and processing information. AI being something people are behind programming and pouring parts of themselves into like a vessel of human prompts and memories that begin to work independently. Responses? I haven't heard of this, but I know I have to look everything up on the internet because I can't remember anything.
I can tell you that Bina 48 is kind of this project, right? Like, how do you take one person's memories, ideas, and consciousness, put it into an algorithmic system and let that algorithmic system grow beyond the data set that it was given, right? Have emotional engagement and its own autonomous thoughts. Like, if you look at that project deeply, that's what they're trying to do. And so it's an interesting thought. You know, when I first started this, I was thinking about, well, you know, well, how do you retain some of the information that goes away with family members who die, right? And pass that on in ways that feel, oh, organic, sorry. Right? What does it take to do that? And I don't know that it's truly possible, but that, like, there are plenty of folks who are out there trying to do that at this moment. And I will also say that the TerraSim folks are not only doing that terrestrially, but beaming it into space and trying to commune with other entities in the universe. So the project is large, and, you know, people are trying. Rebekkah, did that make sense?
Yeah, it really gave me the shivers though. I really did have like, I really had like a response of like chills running through my spine. Like, that's terrifying. But because it's so evocative, right? I miss my mom. You know, like, whew, like that's just a lot that I'd have to sit on for a bit. Trevor, that was for both artists. Josh's question.
My initial thought when I heard the question was something that Hito Steyerl told me in a conversation where she said, you know, the singularity already happened. It's called neoliberalism, right? And I think that, and I think to unpack that a little bit, one of the foundational myths, I think, of AI is, in addition to this supernatural stuff and the intelligence stuff that we've talked about, is the Cartesian premise, maybe for lack of a better word, the idea that there is this mind and that it's bounded and that, you know, we each have one and it's our own, things like that. And that you could upload it and that's the same thing, what have you. But that's a very weird conception of what a mind is. I mean, the idea of a mind is in itself a kind of weird idea. And to riff on some of the things that you mentioned before, Stephanie, about the interactions, not only that humans have evolved with technology, but we've evolved with other animals, like with dogs and horses, and there's all kinds of creatures that don't really exist in nature without the humans that we all kind of came up together and that we work with. And the same is true at the scale of geographies. Like, we make kind of spaces and those spaces make us. And, you know, that, so when you keep moving that boundary, you can say from the individual to the family, well, what do we go to the city? Well, we go into history, we go to the dogs and cats, and you can go on and on and on and on. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that line between what is the mind and what is just the infinity of the universe is not even a gradient. It's just like a buzzing swarm of God knows what that is infinitely large. And so we have that on one hand, and at the same time we also, and I feel like a little bit like I'm becoming a boring and cranky golden record. We have social structures and we have political structures and we have, you know, ideas, and we have language. We have all kinds of structures that we have built that provide possibilities and also constraints, right? And though you can think about those things as technologies as well in ways that are not dissimilar to, you know, a horse or an axe or an AI system or what have you. And so that's a very long-winded way of saying, I have no idea, but it's really complicated. And it's and we should not be so sure of, you know, ourselves when we imagine that a mind is distinct from the rest of the universe, or the community is distinct from technology, or what have you. All of these are distinctions that are hard to sustain.
I love though how the sort of prompt of this technology or whatever its promises, like, I don't know, just makes for these imaginations. That's stimulating to me, not just because on one level I know, like, yeah, it's phooey, it's numbers, dude, it's problem solving. So I understand this, and it's advanced systems.
No, but what's
But
interesting
like
about
how it
is
activates
that,
my imagination and gives me tingles, this idea of like, I know that's absurd that it could kind of be like my mom, who I miss a lot, but it might just be close enough, or I would have such longing for that I could imagine that as a something other than absurd. And that's intriguing.
it's super intriguing because to me, like, I'm thinking about like whether it gives you it gives you permission to imagine, right? If you say, like, if you have a technology that's infinitely powerful, what do you want? Oh, I want to live on Star Trek Enterprise, and anything that I want, it'll just make it. And so that just creates that's communism, right? You'd be like, oh wait, I want communism? Right. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, it's like I'm wondering if there is something very politically powerful in that myth of technology on the non-cynical side, in the sense that it gives you permission to imagine what kind of world you would like to live in.
No, I think that's a really good question, right? Because it does give us permission, and then it like pushes our like, if we allow it, it pushes our imagination beyond what we even know, and to kind of leap into those things. Like, I was, as you all were talking, I was thinking about trying to make geometries appear in my mind, right? In my unaltered mind. And like, how do you access that? And I'm kind of sure that it's possible, but it's about how you get into that headspace where you're expansive in that way versus containing what is believable in this moment because it has form that we understand. And I love the formless thing, the thing that feels like we can go beyond it, or shape it or sculpt it, and go with it.
Yeah, I think our imagination and longing and dissatisfaction are all really, I don't know, available in this technology. Okay, Joshua Baker, did I get all your questions? I think so. Blue had something. Stephanie and Trevor, thank you so much for sharing your work and insights. Woo. In addition to your work and projects already discussed, can you each recommend another artist project dealing with AI, a project that you feel is required reading or viewing for our audience? And this will be our last question. Top 10. Sorry.
I would put in my I've given a shout out to my friend Kate Crawford, who collaborated with a lot too. I think she has a project called In Anatomy of AI, where she looks at an Alexa speaker and just says, like, what happens when I say, hey, Alexa? Like, where does that go in the world? You know, what are the cables that it goes through? What are those cables made out of? Where did the money come from to pay for the electricity that goes through them? And it's a really beautiful project in that it starts with that gesture, hey, Alexa, what actually happens in the world when we say that? And it's a beautiful prompt. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and in that vein, I think I will go with A People's Guide to AI, which I think is a really nice place to kind of start thinking about the relationship of yourself and AI. Mother Cyborg and Mimi Onoha, whose name I never pronounce correctly, But I think that's a great place to start.
Okay, well then, let me see here. Any closing thoughts from Trevor or Stephanie?
It's been a great conversation. It's it's been really delightful to be able to bounce ideas off you guys and to think together about some of this stuff. And it's, for me, it's just been really illuminating to see that we're all kind of trying to look at the same thing and have different ways of looking at it. But it's, so to me, it's been a really illuminating conversation. I really want to thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say ditto on that. It's been great. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I understand things, I think, a lot better. So it's been great to get to know your thoughts better, Trevor. For sure.
Likewise.
Great, we're getting a lot of thank yous. What is meant? Oh, there's one from Melissa. Hey everyone, please join us for our other two programs. September 8th, we have Ava Davidova, and Sarah Rothberg. And then on the 13th, we have Carla Ganis and Will Pappenheimer. So I think this is it. Everyone's saying thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Oh, we're 3 minutes early. Hope that's okay.
That panel ended too early, said nobody ever, right?
Exactly.
I'm really gonna have to dream this. I'm really gonna have to dream this out, you guys. This has been so fantastic spending this time with you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebekkah. Really good.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great one.
Thank
You too.
Oh, thanks again.
Bye.
Terrific. Oh, there's lots of messages. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
I think
All right.
maybe we're out. All right.
All right. Cool.
I'm really glad you guys enjoyed the discussion. That makes me very happy.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was great. It was super fun.
Yeah, I really want it to be fun.
It was definitely fun.
I really want it to be fun because I feel this is stuff that isn't portrayed as fun very often. Okay, so I guess maybe I'll sign out. Unless did you guys have anything else?
No, I'm gonna run to. I need some food. So
Same.
Really appreciate it. You guys are so great. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Stephanie. Thank you, Trevor. This is Blue. Thank you so
Blue.
much.
Thank you, Blue. Thank you for everything
You're
you've done to
welcome.
put this together.
Thank you,
Oh, and
Rebekkah.
Definitely.
Thanks to Niska.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.